Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Oscar Trimboli joining us from Sydney, Australia. Oscar is an award-winning author, host of the award-winning podcast Deep Listening, and a sought-after keynote speaker. He's the head of coaching faculty for the Marketing Academy and was at Microsoft for 11 years. His third book is How to Listen, Discover the Hidden Key to Better Communication, the most comprehensive book about listening in the workplace. And I'm so excited for this conversation because active listening is one of my favorite things to talk about. Welcome to the show, Oscar.
G'day, Andy. Really looking forward to listening to your questions today.
Yeah. So I ask all my guests this question. Before we get really started, please give our listeners the elevator pitch version of your story.
You have to go to April 2008. I'm in a boardroom in Sydney, Australia. It's the annual budget setting process between Sydney, Singapore, and Seattle. We've got 18 people in this conference. And at the 20-minute mark, my vice president looks me straight in the eye across the table in the boardroom and says, "Oscar, we need to talk immediately after this meeting." The only thing that was going through my head was, how many weeks of salary have I got left and who are the 5 people I need to phone? Meeting wrapped up a little early, finished at about the 70-minute mark, and as everyone collected their computers and writing equipment, everyone started shuffling out the door, and I thought I could escape as well. And as I was getting towards the door, Tracy said, "Oscar, please close the door. What I have to say to you is very important." I stepped back after closing the door and started walking towards her. And I was about 3 steps away. And she says, "You have no idea what you did at the 20 mark, do you?" And I thought, great, I'm getting fired. I don't even know why. I sat down. She said, "If you could code how you listen, you could change the world." Andy, what I heard was, "Woohoo! I haven't been fired." So for leaders out there, what you say and what they hear may be 2 completely different things.
Right.
And since then, I've been on a quest to code, not how I listen, but how the best listeners in the world listen in the workplace.
So she was giving you a compliment, and all the while you were processing how your exit was going to transpire.
Yeah, I think it was 8 weeks' salary. I'm pretty sure there was only 3 people out of the 5 that I could actually call if I needed to find employment. And I think it was an elegant and profound piece of listening on Tracy's part, because the question I posed to the group I regularly posed in other meetings for many decades, inside and outside of Microsoft. I didn't think it was a fancy pants kind of way to listen. Obviously, she thought it was. So hopefully we say the difference between hearing and listening is the action you take. So hopefully coding listening into an online software tool, into a jigsaw puzzle game, into workshops, into 3 books, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've honored Tracy's request to code how I listen.
That's great. So my next question is about the events that put rocket boosters behind your career. Is that moment the event, or can you share something else in your career that just really accelerated you?
To be honest, for the next couple of weeks, I was like listening, whatever. I wasn't really paying much attention to that till Chief Financial Officer asked me to come into his team meeting and audit his listening. And I wasn't sure what he meant. The kind of humoured the request and sat in the meeting and started to scratch notes down on a piece of paper. And I realised as I was auditing how he was listening to his team. So he'd ask really complex questions, felt like 3 bullets coming out of the gun at the same time. I'm not sure that the people actually understood his question when they were answering it. So I started to write all this down. And then I realized I was coding how other people were listening in that moment. And at that point, our business was going through a big inflection point. We were going from selling software where people paid us right up front with one big lump sum of cash to getting paid once a month on a subscription plan. So what that meant was that we had to completely change the profitability models for our reseller channels. And then I spent the next year working with those partners. There were 14,000 of them, organizations that represented about 250,000 employees. I didn't get to all of them. We probably got through 1,000 of them. But we just did very simple workshops where we listened to what these owners or principals were struggling with as their business changed from one lump sum of cash to monthly. And as a result of that, I think at that point, I realized that I really enjoyed it. It was the intersection of what I'd done in the past and what I'm really good at in the future. So I think that period of time was definitely the rocket booster for where I am today, a decade down the track.
That's fantastic. So let's start with the basics. Listening means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Can you define for us what it means to listen? Are there different levels? How do you describe listening?
Well, we can all hear. We can, in fact, hear while we're sleeping. And so the act of hearing is basically processing auditory sound waves by our brain. Listening is the meaning we make of those sounds, whether those sounds are words or whether those sounds are the sound of a fire engine in the middle of the night. We will respond very differently to that. So listening is the meaning we make, yet for most of us, we've never been taught how to listen formally. We've been taught by great role models how to listen, either good or bad, our parents, our grandparents, our aunties, our uncles, our teachers, our sports masters, our music teachers, our community that we're part of. They've all taught us how to listen, but we're not doing it necessarily consciously. We don't have multiplication, division, subtraction, and addition. We don't have a very simple way to think about listening. So when I talk to people about listening, I simply say active listening is paying attention to what people say, and deep listening is noticing what people haven't said. And the reason it's important to know what people haven't said is there's 3 really simple numbers that if you know these numbers, this is the neuroscience of listening, you will pay more attention to what people haven't said rather than exclusively to what they have said. So as a speaker, I can speak at 125 to 150 words per minute, yet I can think on average 900 words per minute. So the first thing I say, it's about 14% of what I think and what I mean. If we say that in a completely different way, I haven't said 86% of what I think and what I mean. And this is where misunderstanding happens. This is where assumptions are made. This is where judgments are made. This is where people try and solve the wrong problems. The critical thing for us to know is that if somebody can only get out 14% of what they think and mean, is it any wonder why we're not confused if all we do is dialogue with somebody with what they say the very first time around? As the listener, there's one more number. So remember, as the speaker, 125 to 150 words per minute, I think at 900. As a listener, I can listen much faster. I can listen up to 400 words per minute. Now, some of you may be doing this already. You may be listening to this podcast at 2 times speed. And you can understand everything I say. Maybe my accent and inflection might throw you off every now and again, but you can pretty much process the conversation pretty simply at 200 words per minute. In fact, if you listen on Audible, they go up to 3.3 times. And if the speaking pattern is known to you and the accent is known and what they're discussing is known to you, you will comfortably be able to listen in that range. Now, the problem is, from a listener's point of view, I'm speaking too slowly. So I jump ahead, I anticipate, I drift, I solve, and do all these other things with my mind because all I'm doing is paying attention to what somebody's saying rather than trying to notice how they're saying and what's absent. What are they not saying? Which is really crucial. Andy, as you hear those numbers, you had a bit of a moment. I'm curious what was going through your mind as you were processing those numbers.
Well, my immediate reaction was, what's the role of body language? You talked about vocal inflection and accent, et cetera, as part of the meaning behind that gap, that 86% gap that you described. But where does body language fall in?
So we've researched 35,000 workplace listeners, so we've got a pretty significant set of data for English-speaking workplace listeners. And from that, we know at what level people are listening at. And I'll just quickly say that the first level of listening is listening to yourself. And the second level of listening is listening to the content, what you hear, what you see, and what you sense. So body language comes in at level 2. Now, a lot of people over-anticipate what body language is actually happening and what's going on. When I interviewed Susan Constantine, she calls herself the human lie detector. She is a jury consultant. So she helps law firms to try and decipher the body language of people who are sitting in for jury selection in the United States. So she works with the justice system over there. And she says that when it comes to body language, 2 things to notice and things to avoid. So the classic, if they've got their arms folded, they're negative. It's completely false. They could be sitting under an air conditioning duct and they're cold. Right? So what Susan would say is, see what is their baseline body language and then notice when what they say isn't congruent with their body language. So I'm really excited, but everything on their face shows they're not.
Right.
Yeah. So, which means you have to observe the person you're working with for at least half an hour to establish a baseline before you can start to judge any incongruity. The big thing she would say to notice is when they speak, what's happening to their shoulders, what's happening to their neck, and where is their head tilted in any direction. As humans, we're very quick to identify the incongruency. But if we've got our head in our cell phone or a computer or our connected watch, it's difficult to make out those nonverbal signals there. So when it comes to listening for nonverbals, spend a bit of time noticing, where are their eyes looking? Where is their head tilted? And where is their head relative to their shoulders on their body? And you'll notice very quickly if you tune into that, is it congruent? Does it make sense for what they're saying? Or is it not? And if it's not, maybe that invites you to explore a bit more with them, to simply invite them to tell you more about that. Or I'm curious, could you expand on what you just said there? Because remember, they're also trying to get the next 125 words out, and they're not going to be perfect. So your job as a listener is not to understand what they say. Your job as the listener is to help them make sense of what they're thinking and get that out of their head. And from that point, you can have a really productive conversation. But until that happens, you may be dancing with 125 words that aren't really useful to any of us.
Yeah. So you pointed out kind of one of the myths of listening. What are the myths of active listening that we should be debunking?
Well, the first one is the most important person to pay attention to is the speaker. That's great if you're ready to listen. The person you have to listen to first, always, and deliberately is yourself. What's going on between your ears? Many people have all these browser tabs open in their brain. Browser tab for the last meeting, browser tab for the next meeting, browser tab for a chore at home, browser tab for a conflict that's going on in a customer situation. All these browser tabs are chewing working memory. Listening is a relatively modern process and function that humans do relative to their sight, for example. Our sense of sight came well before our sense of language. Therefore, language is processed at the front of the brain in the prefrontal cortex, and working memory is crucial for that.
Yeah.
I don't know, Andy, if you've ever listened to anybody and you thought, oh, my head hurts. The reason your head hurts while you're listening to someone, one, you could be dehydrated, probably in 50% of the cases. And in the other, it's you haven't shut down the browser tabs for everything else. So you're literally overloading your working memory and your brain is hurting because it's processing much more than it's capable of. For people in the workplace, a simple thing to do to help you shut down the browser tabs is if you're the host of the meeting, you're sending out the meeting invitation, don't start the meeting at the top of the hour. Start the meeting at 5 after the hour or 5 after the half hour, and that will give you and them 5 minutes to arrive at a meeting in a state of mind where they've had a chance to pause, to drink some water, to visit the restroom, to have a sandwich, whatever's required to get ready. If you have the meeting at the top of the hour, their mind is still processing the last conversation for about 5 minutes. So why not be deliberate about that? The other myth about listening is that it takes longer. Done well, if you listen well, meetings are shorter and you have less meetings because there's less miscommunication, there's less times where there's misunderstanding. So when it comes to listening, myth number one, focus on the speaker. No, focus on yourself first and then you'll be available to the speaker. And then for the second one is just make sure that when it comes to listening, that you are ready to have the conversation rather than some false time constraint that we've created.
Well, Oscar, I love being a podcast host because I get to speak with really interesting people just like you, and I am never going to forget the browser tab concept. That is going to live with me forever, and I'm going to be thinking now about, okay, do I have 100 browser tabs open in my mind, and is my working memory being completely taxed here before we get started? That is such a wonderful mental trick. Thank you for that, Oscar.
Apparently, 299 is the maximum number of browser tabs you can open in Chrome. I haven't tried it, but someone mentioned that to me during a workshop once.
Well, as human beings, I think we can have many fewer than 299 open. So as we're talking about myths, I'd like to just pick your brain about multi-threading and multitasking. And is it true that you can have a conversation and be talking over one another and be kind of bouncing all over the place and have any kind of productive outcome from that?
Yeah, in certain cultures, talking over the top of each other is a sign of a great rapport, great relationship, particularly in South America and Eastern Europe. Those cultures, when you're in rapport, definitely talk over each other and build on each other. The body of work that we're dealing with in Western workplaces in English, there's very little evidence that talking over the top of each other is going to be productive in all cases. In some cases, yes. But if you think about two kinds of conversations, new relationship, new task, that's one kind of relationship. And then long-term relationship, existing task. For the long-term relationship, existing task, yeah, you can definitely A, talk faster because the context is known, and B, you can probably jump in over the top of each other in a paired conversation. In a group conversation, definitely not. When it comes to new relationship, new task, you probably want to spend a bit more time making sure that the assumptions you're discussing, the boundary conditions of the conversation are clear to all the participants. So yes, you can. It depends. When I interviewed Professor Stefan van der Stekkel from Utrecht University in the Netherlands, he has written many books on attention. And he said, when it comes to listening, you can listen and perform routine, predictable, low-risk tasks. So preparing a meal would be an example of that. You can prepare a meal, listen to music or watch TV or have a conversation with somebody else. If you're an experienced automobile driver, you can drive a car, you can listen to music. That's no problem. He said, yeah, when it comes to complex, collaborative human interaction, you can task switch, that you will pay a price for that, but you can't multitask. He said, when it comes to human dialogue in a workplace environment, there will be a cost of multitasking. And as long as all parties are conscious of the cost, feel free to continue. And if they're not, then probably talking over people, interrupting, or using a computer at the same time is going to be counterproductive.
Yeah. Oscar, we have to take a really short commercial break, and we're going to be right back with Oscar Trimboli and this fascinating conversation on listening. Hey everyone, I'd like to invite you to start your weekend with me on the Saturday Morning Muse podcast. I briefly explore topics that span leadership, business management, education, and personal continuous improvement. Subscribe to the Saturday Morning Muse podcast on your favorite podcast streaming app or visit andrewtemte.com for more information. And we're back with Oscar Trimboli talking about one of my favorite subjects, active listening. Oscar, let's suppose that you have a mid-level manager sitting in front of you right now, and they have a team member who seems to have a difficult time closing their mouth and opening their ears to what others have to say. What advice do you have for this manager to help their direct report build the skill of active listening? What should they work on first?
Yeah, so I would ask them if that's true in one-on-one as well as group situations. That would be the very first question I'd seek to clarify, to understand what context this behavior shows up in. I want to give you, the mid-level manager, a really simple listening compass, which will also provide you a permission slip to interrupt skillfully and professionally with this employee. Now, the reason why this person is talking continuously and not opening their ears is probably one of two reasons. The first one is not obvious. The reason people like this talk over and over and over again is they don't feel they've been heard in the past. So if they're telling a really long story that they've told before, or they're just telling a really long, in-depth story, tip number one, say, Andy, thanks for sharing that story with me. If you were to summarize that in a subject line for an email, what would it say? And you're helping them distill their thinking very quickly. It's also signaling to them your turn is up, and we'd like to move on. Now, there's another reason why this person feels like it's okay to talk and talk and talk and not to listen. And that's your challenge as the manager. You haven't created the container for the conversation to be productive. Now, if you use this phrase, you can dial your listening compass into the conversation, either in a one-on-one or a group conversation. So the phrase at the beginning of the conversation should say, what would make this a good conversation? So if it was a one-on-one, I would not say what will make it a good conversation for you. I'm not interested in what it is for them. A conversation always has 3 participants present, even if there are only 2 humans. So there's the speaker, the listener, and the conversation. And Andy, I'm sure you'll relate to this because you can have 2 musicians together and there's always 3 entities present. The bass guitar, the piano, and the music they're playing. Right. It has its own rhythm. It has its own direction. It has its own speed. So when it comes to creating the container, just ask them what will make it a good conversation. This isn't the agenda. This is how we're going to have a conversation. And the reason we ask that question is 10 minutes in, they're still telling their story. You simply say, at the beginning of this conversation, you said X would make it a good discussion. How are we tracking? And that will create a mechanism for them to put their own brake on, take it off the accelerator, and just check in with themselves. And you'll get 1 of 3 responses. Oh, yeah, boss, I'm talking about that one a bit too long. Let's move on. Or, yeah, boss, now that I've talked it out, I realize that I haven't even told you about the issue we've got with bananas. Or, hey, that's great. Yeah, I've been off track. Let's get back on track. And the same is true in group meetings as well. So in group meetings, you want to ask that question to every participant because you want the permission slip back from them to interrupt when it gets off track. And you can only interrupt people with their own words. They will forgive you for interrupting them with their own words. They won't forgive you for cutting them off. A couple of things about interruption. Everybody thinks interrupting equals bad listening. It's not true. Skillful interruption allows the person to complete their thought and their breath. If you cut them off mid-thought and mid-breath, they'll think you're rude. So please wait for them to finish completely. So back to the scenario where that person just talks and talks and talks. There's responsibility sitting with you as the manager as well as with them. If you ask that question, what will make it a good conversation, all of a sudden you have this neutral way to progress the conversation if they're talking too long. Andy, I'm curious what the equivalent is in music.
Yeah, in a musical setting, when in a practice, not a performance setting, but in a practice setting, one of the most gentle ways to interrupt the practice and say, "Hey, we got to stop and work on this," is to just take your hands off of whatever instrument it is that you're playing, and just kind of settle in and wait for everyone else to recognize that you're no longer playing, and then that opens up the question, what's gone wrong here, and instead of, "Hey, bass player, you screwed that up. I've found that it's a more gentle but still very direct way to say, okay, we've got something to work on. I've stopped. Let's all discontinue and then have a conversation about what happened.
Yeah. And again, if you're too busy talking and not paying attention, or in this case, you're too busy playing your own instrument and not seeing what's happening with the group, you're going to miss that. So, for managers, there needs to be a consciousness. not just to listen to the participants. A good meeting host will get everybody to listen to the active speaker. A great meeting host will get all the participants to listen to each other, which is what you just explained with the musical example.
Yeah. Oscar, are there, I've had a few meeting organizers use the device of the talking stick that you pass a physical device around when it's the next person's turn to talk. Is that an effective method to kind of control the cadence of a meeting?
Again, if that group is a group that's worked together long-term on similar projects, it's probably a sign of poor performance. If the group is just starting off and finding its rhythm together, it's probably handy. For high context cultures, and by that I mean the Inuit of North America, the Polynesian cultures, the Aboriginal cultures, the Maori cultures, Japanese cultures, Korean cultures, Chinese cultures, they use silence in a very different way to what Canadian English speakers, United States English speakers, United Kingdom English speakers, Australians, they tend to not value silence in the same way. In those high context cultures, the silence is a sign of wisdom, respect, and authority. It's also a signal that you're thinking deeply about the topic. And in those cultures, some use sticks to train their adolescents. But with elders, it's a pattern and a muscle they've developed already. So my only invitation with the stick is if it's a new group and they're just trying to figure out their own cadence and rhythm, it makes complete sense. If they're still doing that 20 meetings down the track, it's probably a sign of poor performance. Yeah. Remember, listen and silent share the identical letters.
Yeah. Wow. Oscar, one last question here. I'd like you to talk just a little bit about your book, How to Listen. What haven't we talked about today that you want to ensure that our listeners take away from this conversation?
The book outlines 5 levels of listening. It talks about listening to yourself, listening to the content, and then at level 3, 4, and 5, it's what you're listening for. You're listening for context, for unsaid, and for meaning. And the thing I would say is when you listen to what somebody thinks and means, they'll feel seen, heard, and valued. So whether they're employees, they'll give you discretionary effort. If they're clients or customers, they'll become an unpaid workforce for you because you can buy the same product or service from anybody else, but they'll just keep saying, yeah, but the thing with working with Andy and his team is they really listen, and that's rare to find. So if you want to fully explore what gets in the way of 35,000 workplace listeners, the book will help you to unpack that. And at the end of every chapter, we give you 3 things to practice every week in the workplace: a question, a technique, and a tool. So you can make progress over 9 weeks as you read the book. It's definitely not a book to be read from cover to cover. Listening is a contact sport and requires practice, just like music.
Listening is a contact sport. I noticed on your website that there is an assessment that businesses can buy. Can you tell us just a little bit about that assessment?
Yeah, I would invite any of you, if you want to learn more about what gets in the way of your listening, just take the 7-minute assessment. Visit listeningquiz.com and you'll answer 20 questions. You'll get a 5-page report. It'll tell you what your primary listening barrier is and your secondary listening barrier. But more importantly, we'll give you 3 tailored, specifically to you, techniques based on how you responded about what to go and do and practice in the next week, month, and 90 days so you can make progress along on that journey. And on average, the average participant completes the assessment in 4.5 minutes.
Excellent. Well, let's go to our lightning round questions. This has been such a wonderful conversation, so value adding. But three lightning round questions. Question number one, you just won $100 million Australian dollar lotto jackpot, but there's a stipulation that 50% of your winnings go to an organization or a cause. Who do you pick?
I picked the Brooklyn Debate League out of New York, and they train high school kids in how to debate elegantly, professionally, generously with other people, so that our public discourse is no longer people shouting at each other or ignoring each other. It's teaching high school children how to debate effectively.
Awesome. Number two, I gave you access to a rudimentary time machine. You can send a message to an earlier version of Oscar Trimboli. What's the message, and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
Oh, I send it to my I send it to my 14-year-old version of myself, where I had a protruding jaw that required a lot of brace work and dental thing that took years and years and years. And I was, at that stage, I was actually learning how to listen. I wanted to put my attention away from people. I didn't want them to look at my werewolf jaw. And I got really good at asking questions. And my advice is, everything you're going through right now is building the muscles you need to create 100 million deep listeners in the workplace when you're in the second half of your career. So take the good as well as the bad out of this moment with your braces.
Excellent. And finally, we're all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal growth journey?
Well, I am learning how to use computer software for the first time. Although I worked at Microsoft, I was in marketing and operational and sales roles, and I'm learning how to code, how to listen. So at the moment, I'm learning how to take a transcript of a team meeting and putting that through my software so we can calculate share of voice, who's speaking the most, who's speaking the least, etc. And I'm doing a really bad job at it. But with the help of YouTube and lots of other resources out there, every day I'm making progress. So compared to where I was 6 weeks ago when I started this journey, I look back and I go, wow, you made awesome progress compared to where I need to get to. It's like time to hire a developer, Oscar. But at least I know how to brief them accurately now, whereas I wouldn't have 6 weeks ago.
Right. Excellent. Well, Oscar, where can folks learn more about you and your books and just everything that you've got going on?
Yeah, it'll sound weird. I don't want you to learn anything more about me. I want you to learn about your listening. Go and visit listeningquiz.com, listen to yourself, find out how you can make an improvement so you can change your workplaces to have fewer meetings that are shorter.
Yeah. Excellent. Oscar, it was such a pleasure getting to know you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for listening, Andy.
All right. Well, my name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share today's highly impactful episode with your friends, your colleagues. I think this one, maybe even with your family members, that'd be a good idea. More deep listening in the family would be good. The show is produced by Nicholas Temte, and we'll see you next time on The Balancing Act.